the great columnist from the Mail on Sunday, Peter Hitchens, who joins me in the studio. Welcome, Peter.
Morning.
Now, your lead yesterday, fascinating. Do you want to know why the Just Stop Oil Fanatics managed to cause so much chaos? You go on to say it is because of New Labour's left-wing Supreme Court, which has made the police and the law so feeble when faced with the Green zealots blocking motorways and roads. Explain.
Well, it's very simple. First of all, no one understands that the Blair government conducted a slow-motion revolution when they were in power. And one of the things they did was they hugely increased the power of left-wing and liberal judges. Two things: they introduced a body called the Judicial Appointments Commission, which enormously changed the way in which judges were appointed to all the major jobs. And in my view, and I think it's very hard to deny this if you look at the results, meant that many, many more liberal left lawyers found their way onto the judges' bench than had done so beforehand. So you have a revolution in law and the way it's decided in court. And then the Supreme Court itself, which is an outrage really against the whole idea of the British Constitution, which is that Parliament is supreme. So how can you have a Supreme Court? The US Supreme Court is an entirely different body, an entirely different constitution. You can't have the same thing here. But they invented it, and by putting it in a beautiful white stone palace, the old Middlesex Guildhall in Parliament Square, and giving 12 judges, as it were, permanent places on this court, they created a new force in our constitution. And that force, last year, decided that it was possible. It's quite a complicated judgment, but its effect is quite simple. Decided that if the level of the process was proportionate, people could do things which were otherwise illegal. The particular case was actually about some protesters, I think back in 2017, who picketed and blocked the road to an arms fair in East London. And they were, in fact, let off by the district judge in their first trial, and then the appeal court quashed that and said that they had, in fact, committed a crime. Then it went to the Supreme Court, against which there is no appeal, and they said, actually, no, the action was proportionate, they were allowed to do it. And every single protest of this kind now has to be judged on the basis of this judgment, and I think some areas of criminal damage as well. Anybody who's really interested in this, the think tank Policy Exchange have produced a very interesting pamphlet in which the whole issue is quite well explained and shows how it's done. But what people don't often realise in this country is how enormously important the incorporation of human rights law into our law under Blair has been. It enables judges to basically give decisions based on political opinion, and that's what happens.
And so the police, I presume, are kowtowed by these decisions because their view would be that to arrest these people, to pursue them through the courts, will end up with them being acquitted.
Well, the
police will have wasted their time and money.
Above all, hate wasting time and manpower on things which end up in the courts being thrown back at them. I don't think the police themselves, I think the police are a very suspect body now anyway. From top to bottom, they've been taken over by people also heavily politically correct.
Agreed.
And are not particularly sad about this. There's very interesting guidance, which the Policy Exchange pamphlet also goes into, put out by the so-called College of Policing, on how demonstrators should be treated, and it's quite gentle. So the police, I don't think, are terribly upset about this, but the truth is that they could well be wasting an awful lot of time and manpower on arresting people who will then be acquitted by the courts on the basis of law made by this new Supreme Court.
And if you're in any doubt as to the political leanings of the average copper these days, certainly police chiefs, compare and contrast the way they deal with eco-demonstrators, these green zealots on the M25 or gluing themselves to roads up here in London, and the way they treated during the pandemic the anti-vaxxer demonstrators.
There is a striking contrast in this, and I think there has been a huge change in police recruitment. I think there are still some police left from the old dispensation who still have old-fashioned common sense ideas about crime and wrongdoing, but I think many younger police officers have completely swallowed the new ideology and will enforce it. People who still think the police are like Dixon or even Z cars are completely and utterly out of date. And when they find out about this, by coming into contact with them, they make this very rapid discovery. They're not what they thought they were. But no, I think it's partly the police. But if it weren't for the courts, I think the police would have no excuse to act as they have been. I was quite amused the other day. I witnessed one of these demonstrations where they glued themselves to the street, and I went to take a look. And the police were much more hostile to me asking questions to the demonstrators than they were to the demonstrators with whom they were chatting matily.
Can we get you pizzas? Can we get you some tea?
Well, it wasn't quite that far, but it wasn't.
They've done it in the past.
I know, but it was. I can't claim to have actually seen that, but it was. There was certainly a sort of neutrality displayed by the police. There was no passion in their enforcement of the law, put it like this.
Well, there was an extraordinary incident a couple of weeks back where a couple of angry motorists got out of their cars and literally physically moved one of the protesters from the road, stuck them on the pavement, and an angry copper turned up, or a couple of angry coppers turned up, and dealt with spoke to the motorists very angrily and said, "Get back in your cars," threatening to arrest them, and then went over to the protester and picked him up and put him back in the road.
I didn't see they picked him up and put him back, I have to say. But there we are. This is now basically the state of the law in this country, and it's not an accident. It's not some kind of weird thing which has just happened out of nowhere. It is the result of the Blair government's deliberate decision to change this country from top to bottom in the most fundamental ways. And still I come across people say, "Oh, Blair was a Tory, it was a Conservative government, he didn't do anything." What are you talking about? This was the most radical government since Oliver Cromwell. And unless people are prepared to examine what it did and reverse almost all of it, then the country's had it.
Don't forget, if it wasn't for Gordon Brown, Tony Blair and Mandelson would have signed us up for the Euro.
That is also true. It's just another great misconception, isn't it? The Gordon Brown, the man who saved the pound, is not although true, is not something which readily comes to the lips of many Conservatives. Almost anybody senior in the Conservative Party was less keen on saving British fiscal independence than Gordon Brown. It's extraordinary.
Indeed. I want to get on to other aspects of your column in just a minute, but in passing, what do you make of these Just Stop Oil, mostly girls who seem to turn up on the news channels, wide-eyed with fanatical fury, screaming at them?
I'm an ex-fanatic, so I feel well, okay. I never mind people being very consumed, especially at a young age where they have few responsibilities and little experience, very consumed with a strong ideal. I've got no objection to that at all. But you pay the price for it. If you want to do civil disobedience, then you should expect to be prosecuted. The other thing is they shouldn't be treated with excessive respect. Dominic Lawson has a very good piece in the Daily Mail today about exactly this point, about the cowed nature of so many news presenters towards these people. They should give them as good as they get. When I was a fanatic, people stood up to me. Particularly when I was the kind of fanatic who tried to interfere with the free speech of others. And you got into trouble for that, and people argued back, and it was good for me. Yeah. And it helped to educate me. And they need educating. The idea that they actually have rightness and wisdom in their largely inexperienced and unschooled heads is completely fatuous. But any society has to accept that there will always be in it young utopian idealists who have very, very strong passions and believe totally that they're right and good. The key thing is to make sure they don't get into power.
As Dominic Lawson pointed out in his excellent article in the Mail today, there was a girl last week fabulously called Indigo
Isn't
Rumble.
it great?
The other one's called Phoebe Fortescue or something. Anyway, so Indigo Rumbelow goes on to Sky News with the excellent Mark Austin, friend of mine, and she starts screaming at him, saying, "Don't you understand that our energy policies will cost billions of lives in the next few years?" And his response was, "Yes, but..."
I know, and it's the yes, but as Dominic pointed out, it's the yes, but that's it should never be the case. Yeah. But by and large, broadcasting has collapsed on impartiality on this issue. They've simply accepted the wildest claims of the zealots without real and serious examination, because it's easier to do that, frankly, and it's a much more too complicated a subject to try and argue. I steer clear of it myself because it's just it's one of those subjects where nothing happens.
I know what you mean.
Except that you're standing there and suddenly a great hosepipe full of slime is turned on you at full pressure.
Tell me
and all
about
you can say, you've gone. So it's almost pointless. But if you're an actual presenter on a major national station, I think you have a responsibility to stand up to it and say, actually, this is to do your homework before they come on air and say, no, actually, what is this claim that you've made based on? What documents are you relying on? What is the research which states this? And also the other crucial thing in all this, the concentration on impoverishing Britain, which is currently so strong. It simply isn't the case that Britain plays a major part in this. Even if you accept all these arguments, let's assume that they're right. If we close down all our coal-fired power stations, as we very nearly have, everything that we've done is immediately blotted out and cancelled out by what China and India do, building new ones. So what was the point of that? We've just impoverished ourselves for no purpose.
Yeah, well, I'm open to arguments. I mean, there is no definitive proof on either side of this argument that mankind is responsible for climate change, or that greenhouse gases are necessarily the big factor in what's causing climate change. You know, I don't know.
But even saying you don't know, I'm afraid,
I know.
You've just opened yourself. You've proclaimed yourself a heretic.
And
that's you done for.
I know. I mean,
Indigo Rumbelow will be
just
up,
want to make sure,
to
folks.
you. Have you invited her on, by the way?
I don't think I want to be Indigo Rumbelow.
Very good TV.
But maybe I should. But then they turn around, as I say, what I'm saying, folks, is I just don't know. I'm open to be persuaded. As simple as that. I'm being careful here, Peter. But then they go, oh, you're a skeptic. As if that's the worst pejorative term you could possibly imagine. Yes, I'm skeptical. I'm a journalist. I'm skeptical about everything. What's wrong with skepticism?
A lot these days, because you're not allowed to be skeptic anymore. We live in a increasingly not in terms of being a police state, but in terms of only one idea is acceptable, and a totalitarian society in which the expression of doubt is itself a thought crime.
Peter, G20, a froth of excitement all over the world. G20
Absolutely,
is started in Bali, and Sergei Lavrov, the Foreign Affairs Minister of Russia, has turned up there, got off the Russian plane, to stories that he was subsequently rushed to hospital and is very sick. And we're now receiving footage of Sergei there in his shorts on his hotel balcony, writing his speech, and the Russians said that they've been subjected to fake news, all of which sort of adds to the suspicion that this G20 convention is a waste of time, just as COP27 was a waste of time. What are these people? What are they hoping to achieve here?
It's a boondoggle, isn't it? And if it were held in, say, Stoke-on-Trent, I don't suppose people would be quite so keen to go. Isn't it interesting that it's held in Bali?
Always nice places.
If these places were regularly held in post-industrial towns. In the American Rust Belt or in the English North, then I think there would be less keenness to go. Everybody would be sending their deputies. The deputies would send their deputies. But I suppose the one thing to be said in favour of them is that leading figures in the world get to know each other personally, which might just at some point mean that they behave more intelligently towards each other than they otherwise would. But I can't think of any other reason for it.
COP27, more than 400 private jets turned up there. Joe Biden, to be fair, shortly before he made that gobbledygook speech, he's reduced his motorcade to 20 cars, apparently. In Scotland last year, it was like 85 cars. The optics on these events are not good because they seem to sort of gather to cause about as much pollution as a group of people possibly could. But what on earth do they ever achieve? What did they achieve this year in Egypt?
Well, you see, they don't achieve something which you necessarily particularly want. But they do, in terms of the COP conferences, they keep up an unrelenting pressure on governments to follow the orthodoxy which we were discussing earlier. So they do achieve that. So they can't be ruled out. As I wouldn't go so far with things like G20, which, as I say, I think is largely pointless. But the COP conferences are there to keep up relentless pressure on governments to carry on legislating for the economic doom of the Western nations.
Well, which is not necessarily a good thing, is it?
I would myself prefer it if we weren't doomed, but as it is, there doesn't seem to be much I can do about it.
We're not necessarily.
Sometimes it's great to be old.
Well, I wouldn't know about that. No. But it's not. We're not necessarily doomed because of climate change. We may be doomed because of the policies that arise because of our approach to.
Well,
climate
that would be my
change.
view. I mean, assume, for the sake of all this, assume that the Indigo run below is more or less right. Then, even if that is so, the measures that are being taken don't seem to have been that effective. Wouldn't it be better, as I think Nigel Lawson, Dominic's dad, was pointing out several years ago, wouldn't it be better to wait and see how the climate change's effects manifested themselves and then act to deal with them, rather than constantly spending vast sums of money and strangling your economies in measures which are not working? Again, reason is not being applied here.
No, it isn't. Let's move on. I want to talk about the migrant crisis. We learned today that Suella Braverman is hurling more money at the French.
Well, I'm in favour of that. I think we should hurl money at the French. I'd rather hurl money at the French than spend it on stupid...
But do you think it'll work? I think
there's a very good chance it will work if we only spend enough. France is a serious country run by serious people. It has a certain measure of...
Why do they need our money to patrol their own beaches?
Because Britain's now effectively has a land border with France. If you go down there, this is what you realise, that the Channel is no longer an obstacle. We cannot defend it against large numbers of migrants arriving in Ross. You can't. Once they're on the water, they will arrive here. Once they arrive here, you can't. Therefore, logically, however much you dislike this, logically the solution to the problem lies in France. I think there's been a lot of silly talk about France. We've always laughed at them a bit, and they've laughed at us in return. But they are one of the very few serious countries in the world, quite similar to us in that way. If we treat them sensibly, and if we pay them enough, because it involves their state doing our work, then I think we can get an enormous decrease in the number of migrants actually getting into the Channel. I think it's a serious policy. And I think that it's the first one which has this Rwanda stuff and the pushback and all the rest. You could see from the beginning they were doomed. And Theresa May's trucks going around North London saying you're all going to be expelled. Nobody believes this. It doesn't happen. But if you can get the French to stop them embarking in very large numbers, then you will make a difference. And I think it's possible, and I'd rather spend money on that than on HS2 and on Trident Renewal and on an awful lot of other stupid projects which this country wastes money on for no good purpose.
With you there, I would point out, though, that last year Priti Patel gave the French for exactly the same reason 54 million. Now Suella Braverman...
The French
haven't done much.
No, they have done quite a lot, but it's not enough. And they have
972
they have stopped. Yeah, but they have stopped. No, more would have come if the French were not actually cooperating with us. We need more cooperation with the French. And of course, the foolish remarks made by Liz Truss about France not necessarily being an ally didn't help. I say the French are proud and independent, and in some ways they set an example to us. They don't let themselves be messed around by the Americans the way we do, for instance, and they're very hard to push around. Treat them with respect and recognise that what you're asking is for the French state to do us a big favour, and that therefore they must expect something in return. I know that all the blowhards in this debate say, "Oh no, it's a waste of time." What else have they got? What other policy have they got which would actually work and could be made to work? Just tell me what it is, because I can't see it. The only way to control this is to get the French on side, and if that costs a lot of money, it's very good spending of money compared with an awful lot of the waste that we do.
I hope you're right, but I remain...
Try it and see. I
remain fairly cynical.
We've not tried it properly yet, and I think we should. And I think a bit more respect for the French and a bit more understanding that we're asking them a big favour, and we might get somewhere.
Okay, well, let's finish on a huge philosophical concept. You mentioned in your column, only a couple of minutes left. So in 2 minutes flat, Peter, explain why there is no such thing as human rights.
Well, they don't. They come from nowhere. Look, the whole morality of the Western world is actually based on Christianity and laws inherited from the Bible. If you look at the law courts in the Strand, then Moses is among the figures actually sculpted on the building. In the Old Bailey, there are quotations from the Bible, and the whole of our law was based on Christianity. We've now dumped Christianity. Decided it doesn't matter, doesn't count. We don't believe in God, and therefore that as an origin of law has been destroyed. So what do we have instead? We have human rights. But where do they come from? They come out of the heads of liberal judges. They're simply matters of opinion. They can't appeal. Yeah. They can't appeal to anything other than the fact that they think they're good. Who decides which is a protected category and which is not? Who decides which is a human right and which is not? Look at any Charter of Human Rights. It has many clauses which compete with each other. Who decides which comes first, privacy or freedom of the press? Just for example, it's impossible to decide. What you do is you create a judgeocracy in which individual judges, most of them left-wing liberals, decide how the country is run.
Yeah, same deal with hate crimes. Who decides what
Who decides which sort of hate matters and which sort of hate doesn't?
Or what exactly hate is?
Well, indeed, and it becomes so subjective that it all lands in the lap of judges. Parliament is reduced to a cipher. The power of public opinion over policy diminishes, and that, as Lord Sumption, who was a Supreme Court Justice, rightly said in his Reith lectures a few years ago, is very dangerous to our freedom.
I wish we had a load of Lord Sumptions on the Supreme
Yeah, well, there aren't, I'm afraid, very many of them.
That would be good.
They don't make them like that anymore.
They certainly don't. Peter, great to talk to you. That's Peter Hitchens, the columnist from the Mail on Sunday.